Typically every year, there's a few different Pro Siege teams I think would be cool to see reach the top, and it's a slightly different group every year. I don't have a bias toward any particular team other than hoping every NA team does good because the state of California is on my birth certificate, but generally, I love seeing every team play well. There's really no one I don't want to see succeed, and I promise that's not just the default commentator PR response. But there are a few stories for the 2025 season that poke through the rest in my caveman brain.
But here's the fight, there's one! Dan will lock it in! Round the corner, there's an ace!
VP have the longest standing 3-man core of any team in the world right now. It used to be the NIP Big 3 with Pino, Psycho, and Muzi, but the Empire Big 3 has been a near constant staple since early 2019. It kicked off great when they won Milan a couple months after adding Dan, and then took down G2 to win Raleigh, but the only 2 LAN wins they've ever had are 6 years in the past. They've cracked the top 4 a few times since then, including twice last year and twice as runners-up a few years ago, but it's starting to make me question how much longer this core has left before they were to inevitably shake things up. And it's crazy because they absolutely could have been on Siege's Mount Rushmore, and I think you can argue they are, but every time they've gotten far at LAN since 2019, they've been gatekept by Brazilians. And TSM that one time. So I think it'd be cool if they won a trophy to break that 6-year drought and prove that they can hang in a scene where Brazil and BDS dominate the podium a lot. You don't get cores or even really duos sticking together that long very often, so maybe part of this is rooted in nostalgia for me, but remember when Empire dropped them a few years back and they had to slowly get added to VP periodically? They were out of action for a while and didn't look like themselves for a bit, but now feels like they're really starting to come back after dealing with all that crap. But flip side, if this lineup isn't good enough to win championships in the modern era, then I don't really know who comes in to fill. There were only 2 other Russian players in Challenger a few months ago when historically that pool has been a lot bigger, which is the problem a lot of European teams have run into and then switched to international lineups to avoid. So for as good as VP have seemed recently, it does make me feel like any stage they don't win just continues to raise the pressure level. Put them on LAN, and I'll always give them a chance, but I am rooting against Father Time for their sake.
They're spamming it. There's no way Diaz loses this. Shotgun ready for the 1 pump.
I'm sad as anyone else Nesk and Palu aren't a duo anymore, but I do think the way Liquid has retooled themselves this year sets them up pretty well for the future. I love the story of Ask's return to the team. You can't get me to root against Diaz, and they got added to what is still a great core. Plus, if you were wondering if Nesk still has it, he had a top 10 performance in Reload, even if that tournament doesn't matter for much. So it got me thinking that they could be contenders if they weren't in the same league as FaZe, Furia, and the Bulls. I'm traditionally anti-Dynasty. I like it more when there's more parity and more teams get to win, which is why I hate the Chiefs and the Patriots. But if you do have powerhouses in the same league as you become a better team figuring out how to beat them, and if you do beat them, it's a much bigger deal. And so far on CJX, Liquid's 1-0 over the world champs right now. So I'd like to think they'll have this build figured out, but they're going to have to go through what I think is Brazil's current Big 3 multiple times this year and stave off challenges from Loud, maybe BD, maybe NIP if their off-season additions produce. It's going to take a lot of work to do that, and then maybe go to LAN and hold off the Americans and make sure you don't drop maps to CAG again. Like, they're going to have their hands full this year. But when you look at the slope they'll have to climb, if they can persevere through that, that's the kind of story I can really get behind. It might be a little bit delusional to think the 4th best team really has a chance, but if they do well, I can say I hitched my wagon to them from the jump. They're not quite underdogs. They're definitely not favorites. They've had a high ceiling for years that I hope isn't pulled down too much by Palu's absence, and they've got some close LAN finishes over the last 3 years they need to get revenge for. And if you asked me which Brazilian team I wanted to see win the most, it's Liquid. Everyone else already has their trophies, so I want to see if they've got what it takes to earn theirs.
There's one above. He's wary of that. The shot's ringing. The shot's
In general, I've always been rooting for APAC success. We're talking since the days of Fnatic and Nora Rengo when they'd guaranteed get quarterfinals at Pro League lands. I love cheering on underdogs, and that's what APAC's been since they got added forever ago. You know this. The payoff is going to be massive when a team from that side of the world finally lifts a trophy. But if you ask me which one I think has the best chance, right now, FearX is definitely up there. Here's the thing. Korea having its own league meant talent was stretched across a lot more teams with a lot less competitive potential. Now, APAC North only has 3 Korean teams, and I think FearX probably got the best consolidation of top talent onto one team. D+ decided to abandon the Korean player pool, which freed up Coded and Woogieman. Now they reunite with Rin, and Good Boy and Mephi are a no-slouch flex duo, and it's working. Say what you will about the current states of G2, BDS, and Space Station, but picking up wins against all 3 is something people should pay attention to. Trading CAG on maps is also significant, but it's those inter-regional wins that signal this lineup's got juice early. And it's enough for me to pray that this is finally their time. Previous iterations of FearX or Sandbox got rolled and roasted online for valid reasons. I wouldn't put this team very high up in the APAC conversation at the time, but across all 3 subregions now, they might be as high as top 2 if CAG is number 1. I want to see how Weibo, Chiefs, PSG, and the Brazil teams do first before locking in anything close to that ranking, but damn if I didn't have fun watching them in Rio. And also, to see a Korean team climb the mountain after how much they've had to catch up to the rest of the world in recent years, that would also be sweet in its own way. And I'm very much here for that story if it comes to pass. But really, I'm here for any team from Asia or Oceania to get theirs finally, because then we can firmly put the question of APAC GOAT to rest once and for all.
Hot and Cold and Gavarni have given them an absolute masterclass in the 2v4. Solitov, he doesn't have the diffuser. He can't find the last man.
Okay, I only wanted to include one NA team on this list because I could talk about all of them, but M80 in particular is in an interesting position, and I want to know if they can beat some allegations this year. The first is winning without Fett. The one stage he coached them, they were first in NA and then first in the world, and then the post-Manchester months without him were not great for that core for lots of reasons. But then 3 of those guys went on to get 4th at SI without org support, and now 4 of them are back together again. Second allegation, winning without Spirits. Man's a shield demon at a time when shields are all the rage, and he wasn't playing them nearly as much during the Manchester run, but he is now, which might be a missing piece this team needs to find an answer for. Third allegation, winning with Fabian. Having the GOAT in your corner does look like an upgrade on paper. It just makes me wonder whether there might be some clashing styles or too many cooks in the kitchen, and that's the sort of question that you can really only answer on game day. Anytime a team wins a LAN and they're not an existing Titan, I want to see how well they play for several months afterward to see if they have sustained success or if this was a one-time thing. Like, are we getting a W7M or are we getting a Rogue? And I gave that Beast Coast core a lot more grace than other teams because they only had the one stage after Manchester before that weird split. So I've noticed I'm giving them a little more time to show whether they're a contender in NA or worldwide before making any absolute statements on them. But how they play in 2025 will go a long way toward answering those questions. And aside from being an NAL guy, I would also love to see another NA team on the same level or higher than Space Station or Dark Zero in terms of international consistency. They're always there, and getting M80 to a similar level would be a cool thing to see for parity's sake. Plus, for Siege teams that win LANs out of nowhere, there's been a trend where lots of them drop off pretty sharply afterwards, and I'd love it if somebody broke that trend and stayed at the top after getting there when nobody expected them to. I think this M80 team has the players and the staff to do it on paper 100%. But we don't write books about Siege. Tom Clancy does. Well, he did. Beyond that, I'm very curious to see how the team Oxygen's wrangled together does, if G2 can get their act together, whether Weibo making a supposed Asia super team looks as good in the server as it does to me, how all of the new challenger promotions are going to do in their respective leagues, if Chiefs can remain on top in OS after their Montreal appearance so that they're not splitting SI points between them and somebody else. Like, dude, the stories in Siege are just some of the best if you know where to look. Again, I'm not biased toward one team in particular, but you give me a good narrative, and you've got me hooked for the year. Let me know who you're rooting for in the comments. I'll see you later. Peace.